Okay, it's a couple of minutes past 3, and we've got a lot of the crew we expected to be here today, which is fantastic. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Dominic, Dermot, Jacqueline, whose faces we see a little bit less often. So it's really fantastic to have you here. Thank you very much. And we're near end of term. Next week is the last one we do before June. So delighted we got to see you on that basis as well. Just for you who don't hear this speech every week, Innovate Island is this Friday, and it's projects and programs you get involved in outside of the Fridays, but it's like a club, it's community. And we have that vision that Ireland would be a true center of excellence for innovation. And as a community, well, who are we? We are practitioners, we are explorers, we are advocates for innovation. So we're trying to do it, and we're trying to do it better, and we're trying to make it better for everybody all around us. And that's what we do when we get together. We cry on each other's shoulders. We find each other to help each other do work, or to pitch for work sometimes among the self-employed. And we sometimes learn new things about innovation. A lot of times we learn new things about Ireland and how do we do things here, or how we might do innovation in other places like Argentina and Sweden and Singapore. Fascinating exemplars all. What we're doing today is bringing a little bit closer to home. And what I'm going to do in a minute is ask Brian to introduce our guest for today. So Brian, are you with us, and are you ready to do your pitch?
Well, not my pitch, but I am ready to do my introduction. Thanks, Owen. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending today. As you might have known, I've spent the last 6 months participating in the first Central Bank of Ireland, their inaugural Innovation Sandbox program, which has been a great experience. And it gives me, I suppose, great pleasure to introduce Dave Tighe here, who is the Innovation Strategy Manager at the Central Bank of Ireland. And he's going to spend a bit of time with reflecting on the other side of the participation in the Innovation Sandbox program. I suppose, you know, when you look at innovation and regulatory, they don't normally fit in the same sentence together comfortably anyway, but actually in this case they really did. So a really worthwhile experience. So Dave, background very much a leader experienced in innovation, in regulation, in fintech, and in finance and banking. He's part of the innovation strategy and policy team. Obviously, one of the innovation sandbox is one of their outputs. Prior to joining Central Bank, Dave had senior leadership roles, Bank of Ireland in innovation customer experience roles. KPMG holds a chartered bank qualification from the Institute of Bankers, MBA from Manchester Business School, and degree in English from Trinity College Dublin. So we are all looking forward to this, and I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Dave. So thanks a lot for being here, and thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brian. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the old intro. I have to say, sign me up. I love the sound of this club. Sounds fantastic. It's nice actually to have a conversation with fellow innovators, and particularly Owen and Brian have been saying to me, you know, in many cases when we do this presentation, it's quite an extensive one. I'm not going to spend an hour presenting. That's not a good use of time for everybody. It's much better on the Q&A side, but it is helpful maybe to bring to life a little bit around the sandbox, the program, our innovation approach, and what we've done on that first, so that we can get into that as well, which would be really good. I do have a short presentation that I'll move through fast, so I'll bring that up onto the screen if that's okay for everybody. Just bear with me for a second. And of course, the one time you need it to work.
Dave, being in the central bank, has an extra layer of security, which is probably reassuring that he's struggling with the technology, that it's not easy to share Central Bank of Ireland. Yeah. But we did test this twice.
We did. Okay, give me one sec.
Dave, if the slides don't work, we will manage just fine, because we can share the slides afterwards, if that's okay by you.
No, we've got it going there. So everybody should be able to see them, I'm hoping.
We can. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Yeah, okay, so just give us one sec. Just bear with me. It was just the central bank doing its thing on me. Right, there we go. That should be in presentation mode for everybody now.
It is. Well done.
Yeah.
Super. So, innovation in central bank. Small enough team, innovation strategy team. You can see is there. Carol, delighted to hear Carol was part of the innovation setup for yourselves originally. And what you'll see in this team, which is really important, was myself, Owen, and Carol joined the central bank just 18 months ago as part of an approach to innovation strategy. So innovation is not new for the central bank. The hub has been open for about 6 years, been quite good in what it's doing and engaging with fintechs and innovation in financial services, but it needed to go further, and it needed to go to much more depth and development of what that strategy was for the organization. So central bank actually brought in myself, Carol, and Owen, who were external. As you heard, my experience, over 25 years experience in financial services, fintech and innovation. Carol, a storied career in financial services and innovation, Virgin Money, Ulster Bank and Dog Patch initiatives. And Owen, who's probably one of the most connected men in fintech, used to work for Enterprise Ireland, has been a major part of a huge amount of investments, over 250 fintechs from the perspective of that. And that was very much about bringing in that expertise, knowledge, and learning from outside the organization to work and partner with inside the organization, to take a new approach and to start learning from that. And throughout this presentation, and what you're going to hear from me, is probably one philosophy that I brought to everything as part of my career and everything that we've done, and that is about ecosystem engagement, the concept of open and engaged and collaboration with others in the ecosystem. And I think that's probably the most important thing for our innovation strategy. We are not going to be the experts of every single new technology, new business model, but what we can do is collaborate and learn with others so that we can learn exactly how that's working, what risks it brings to the financial system, and the partnerships approach also helps where we can help them understand what it means to be regulated and the approach in that. And I'll tell you a little bit about that strategy in a second. So you know this as well as I do, you know, a really strong innovation ecosystem from an Irish perspective, particularly in the fintech space. So we have an Ireland for Finance strategy. Government sets out an approach, commitment to innovation of financial services. Central bank and our programs are part of that. EIIDA has a very strong promotion approach to Irish fintech startups, as well as the accelerators and programs and support funding. Very strong approach from a third level, number of fintech programs as well as accelerators. And then you've got the representative bodies as well. Not many ecosystems are this vibrant, but also what we see is the actual fintechs themselves. And I'll talk about this a little bit when I mention the innovation hub. You start to see real trends in that reg tech, payments, where we're very strong from an Ireland perspective in that innovation, bringing together that element of technology with that element of financial services. So this is probably the one slide I would say really captures everything we're about to talk about. This is our strategy. This is the approach. And this took us the most when we came into the organization to really sit down and deliver and develop this. And this was, again, our approach to the concept of how do we do that collaboration? How do we do that piece of engagement where we're able to learn, but also the people that we're engaging with are able to learn from us as well? So the first two you'll see are I suppose, our learnings, which is by doing this, it deepens our understanding of innovation in the financial services sector. So it helps us to learn and understand what's happening in the financial services sector and for the future. It also better informs our regulatory approach. And then on the flip side, what's in it for the firms and for the innovators, third level, etc., that all engage with us? Well, first of all, it helps us to explain to innovative firms what being regulated entails. And that's really important to actually help that understanding of what it means to be regulated, the elements of risk, the different factors that are required to build into the organization for growth. And that actually comes down to then, if you think about those nascent and fast growing firms, how do you embed that regulatory culture from an early stage? And I'd probably just pause there for a second and give an example of that. We met a firm, an Irish firm, a fintech firm, who had actually gone through a Sandbox program globally. And we asked them about their engagement through the Sandbox, their regulatory Sandbox, and what they learned. And the one thing that they said to us that really stood out to us, it was just a kind of a guiding principle for us, was it helped them embed a culture of compliance in their organization, that they had very little understanding to the real scale of what it meant to be regulated, to the team, the knowledge, the funding, the levels of risk and understanding that was required. as they were building and growing their firm. And that by actually engaging with the regulator early through some of the programs globally, they were able to build that into their roadmap for growth. And it was a big success for them from that roadmap perspective. And that was something that stuck with us, that there was a real value add for the regulator to engage and talk with these firms for them, but there was also a massive value add for us to learn from the ecosystem. So we spent a good bit of time in relation to our research. We listened to stakeholders. We have a number of forums around innovation and innovation subgroup in the central bank. We had a number of different protection codes and discussion papers out there where we included innovation, and we went out and we collaborated and talked to multiple of our peers. FCA and Singapore as an example, I would stress if you're interested in the space, both of them are doing some very clever things. The FCA is an example, most recently just launched their supercharged AI Sandbox, where they're working and testing on AI in the financial services system. They did actually call it the supercharged AI Sandbox. I'm not sure why, who came up with that one, but it's really, really smart, really clever approach to that learning and understanding from innovation. But what we also saw was that in central banks, there's about 40 innovation hubs across Europe. It's the simple stuff. Engaging with the regulator really by sending an email in and having a question, short, sharp engagement. And there was 15 sandboxes, all of varying formats and degrees of success. Some 0 applicants, others very little outcomes, others much more successful. And we learned from what they were doing. We didn't copy one. What we did was we looked at both the ecosystem we had, we looked at the needs from the firms that we were talking to, we looked at our needs, and then we took some of the key things that we felt were working abroad, but also we developed some of our own features into the Sandbox program as well. So I mentioned the European review, you can see them there, but one area that I would call out is that innovation hubs and regulatory sandboxes, they're very good. They have a strong aspect as long as the outcomes and the purpose are known, but there are new activities emerging. And this is something that the central bank, we have our eye on over the next 12 to 18 months. We've already started to do hackathons, but things like virtual sandboxes, tech sprints, lab programs, these are starting to become the norm in the more progressive of the central banks to really understand technology development and new firms. And I think you'll see more of these emerge because they're much more agile and faster in the way that they work from the likes of a more in-depth and longer term sandbox. So maybe just to bring to life what we see through the Innovation Hub. So the Innovation Hub is the front door. We've expanded that, developed it, made it much more formal approach so that you can really get the answers you need. We've enhanced our website so that there's more clarity of information around it. And they were key parts of what we did. But just to give you a sample of what we saw in 2024, we're in the upper quartile in relation to the engagement that we get through the hub in Europe, always have been over the last number of years, 5 to 6 years. What we have seen, though, is we generally see RegTech, always a very strong category, and that really evidences that RegTech expertise that's in Ireland. Payments is always a consistent category as well. We have started to see the emergence of AI as an enabling technology in some of these firms. What I would say is that it's still early days. So those who are coming to us through the hub are coming to us with process efficiencies, early use cases, but very simple use cases of AI. They're not moving into the more high-risk AI spaces. But I think we will start to see that emerge. Obviously, blockchain and actually crypto as well. There's a lot that comes from the Irish perspective, both from a payments perspective and with new regulation in MiCAR, the markets and crypto asset regulation. And one of the things that we've been delighted about that we've really spent some time on, and I think it's something the innovation community knows well, but maybe outside the innovation community doesn't know that well, is when you talk about fintech, it automatically assumes it's startups. It automatically assumes it's early stage firms. The reality is that innovation can happen at any level of a business, whether that's a legacy bank, 200 years old, whether that's a large European or global payment scheme, or if it's an early stage startup. We want to talk to them all through the Innovation Hub. We don't want people to feel that it's just for that startup conversation. It is about any aspect of innovation where you can have that conversation around regulatory advice and support. So what does it look like for us? What's our model? Our model is the Innovation Hub, data hackathons, which we've ran with the University of Limerick most recently as part of the Sandbox program, and I will touch on that. Our events and roundtables, which are ongoing on particular topics. So anything that's specifically relevant both to the ecosystem and to ourselves, we'll look to do those events and roundtables for learning, cross-learning, just short, sharp events. And then the Innovation Sandbox program, which is a much more in-depth program, which runs over 6 months. So just to bring that to life, what is the Innovation Sandbox program? Well, first of all, we chose a theme for this. Now, that's not always consistent with other sandboxes. We've seen many sandboxes that are just generic. Come on into the sandbox, test in the sandbox, and leave the sandbox. And the reality is, I'm not sure there's that much shared learning in that. What we felt was that a theme aligned to our mandate and also aligned to what the ecosystem, what innovators were asking for, would be much stronger, so that there was shared learning across the firms. And Brian and Dominic can probably touch on this later in the Q&A, but I think one of the biggest things that we saw, maybe what we didn't expect, but was one of the great delights of the Sandbox program, was the firms engaging with each other to solve for particular problems and actually taking on new initiatives with each other. By bringing them together on these key topics, they shared a lot of knowledge themselves together, which was great to see. But we set up a theme on combating financial crime. This jumped off the page when we did our consultation. We saw many firms and representative bodies say this was a key area. It was key for our mandate as well. So really, when you think about fraudsters, the pace at which they're moving, the use of technology that they have, how do we keep ahead of that and how do we develop that? And that's what this sandbox is all about. I would say that with a sandbox, again, some of the more unsuccessful ones that we've seen, where the problems have laid, has been, what was the outcome? What was the purpose of the sandbox? What were they trying to achieve? So one of the things we did was we set problem statements right from the start. Here's the areas that we wanted to really examine and understand, to develop outcomes in these spaces, whether it was key technology solutions that would have positive outcomes, whether it was collaboration, information sharing across it, whether it was analyzing data patterns and using technology to detect fraud patterns for consumer behavior. Fundamental problem statements in the financial crime space that could be answered. So we set up a program over 6 months. We provided regulatory advice and support, and that harks back to that comment I made about the firm that we talked to, who talked about a culture of compliance. It was the regulatory advice and support that they got that was really valuable to the firm. We had on-site and virtual sessions that just worked really well, one per month, where we brought the firms together to talk with experts from the central bank and others outside the central bank, Comrade, Commissioner Man, the guards, etc., law enforcement as part of that. With regular check-ins with the teams. What were the questions they were needed answering, and how could we put them in front of subject matter experts across the central bank? And then we underpinned it by a data platform, which enabled us to do the hackathons later, but also we procured a platform from a company called NIA1 in the UK. They work with the FCA, where they brought over 200 synthetic data sets that were able to be tested on as part of combating financial crime. So what did it look like? Well, basically, these are the modules. Module 1 all the way through 6, things like themes, trends, and consumer impact, current regulatory themes, data sharing, horizon scanning. So really important areas in relation to combating financial crime, all underpinned by ongoing management with the firms to understand their needs, answer their questions, SME check-ins, to bring subject matter experts from around the organization to support and help on that, and then underpinned by the data platform. 7 great projects. So we had 38 applicants to the sandbox, which we were delighted about. And 7 projects came in. And you can see we broke them down around identity verification, fraud prevention, and data sharing. One thing I will say is what we've seen across sandboxes is there is a tendency for this thing called sandbox tourism, where you have firms or startups or scale-ups who perhaps are maybe burning capital, haven't really got the traction they're required, and feel, well, if I go into a sandbox, I'll get a rubber stamp from the regulator. I'm sure that will help me with VC or clients, etc. And the reality is that's not the case. And also, that's not something you want in the sandbox because it just doesn't add value. What we had here was 7 projects that were fundamentally trying to solve for the outcomes, were fundamentally trying to do something creative in the financial crime space, and needed the sandbox and enabled to do that. What we were also delighted about was things like Tighe and PTSB, where you had a project, a joint project between what might be considered a more traditional bank with a fintech, working together to solve for particular problems. And then, right across it, or other firms with particular issues and developing particular solutions like Trust Elevate in the youth account opening space, or Explio and what they're doing in the smishing and fraud space. So again, it was a great way for us to see how those technologies were developing and what they did. So we had constant principles for success. We always talked about these at the start of every session. But what was great about it is what they were lived. The projects that came in to work with us and our approach to them as well. We were that openness and transparency. If it wasn't working, we were clear about it, or if they needed something else, they were clear about it. There was always active participation. One thing that we were never short of was debate and discussion around the table, very strong collaboration and outlining the needs. One of the final things I'll just focus on in relation to the Sandbox itself was it was hugely important, and I'm sure you all know this from your own firms. Innovation that happens outside the organization, not aligned to the strategy, very quickly gets cut off, very quickly loses funding, and has no real value add to the organization. We needed to make sure that this was meeting the mandate and the strategy of the organization. So yeah, absolutely, consumer protection, financial stability in the financial crime space. But also, how do we bring our own people to this and open it up to our own people? And you'll see the traditional stuff that you'd expect, like steering groups with senior leaders, central bank SMEs, and so on. But probably the thing that was the most success for us was our Sandbox Champions Network. We found, and I used to refer to them as the Trojan mice across the organization. They weren't all leaders. They were just people interested in innovation. They were people interested in fintech. They had turned up at particular events, turned up at particular discussions, or had inputs into particular things. And we worked with them to design the modules, the content, to connect to the right subject matter expert across the organization. And they are champions who will then be part of all of our sandboxes going forward as well. They were pivotal internally to the success of our sandbox. So outcome-wise, from a participant perspective, well, two of the participants here, and I'm sure they can probably talk to it better around what they got from it. But what we saw in it was many of them were able to accelerate their product, both the understanding of risk within it, but also where they were developing the product and getting it out to market. For ourselves, we got really strong, that front row seat to innovation that you don't always get. Actually, central banks generally don't get. And to learn around the application of new technologies, for example, AI, and how AI was being used on data trends and fraud. We also got to see really clear examples of how our mandate was being delivered, like consumer protection, financial stability, by brilliant outcomes for the consumer and financial system from these firms. So there was just a whole circle of outcomes for us, for the system, and for the participants that were working against those problem statements, which worked really, really well. Final piece on this was, because we had the data platform and because we had these problem statements, we were then able to open up to our research exchange program with University of Limerick and actually provide them with the data sets, the 200 data sets as well. And there, over 40 PhD students basically went at them with hypotheses and theories to test against it for financial crime. And it be produced nearly over 40 papers in relation to their challenges of where they are financial crime, using the data, and those outcomes are then communicated across the organization. So, key messages, final piece from me. One thing I would say is sandboxes are just one tool in the innovation approach. There are many different versions of them. I'm sure we can have a conversation about that. I think sometimes people are too rigid in what a sandbox should be. Obviously, it comes from the traditional coding method, use of a sandbox. But as you move into sandboxes for regulatory purposes and sandboxes for testing in strategy, I think it can be very much what you need it to be for the ecosystem. Clarity of purpose, both for the firm and for ourselves, was absolutely vital. What is the outcomes of this? Why are we doing this? What are we looking towards? What's the path? Early and often engagement with the innovation ecosystem. I think many central banks don't do this. Our approach was, nearly treat, and sometimes it can be wrong, it can be seen as wrong to say this, but it's like, think of the firms nearly like a customer. Think of how you're designing from a customer perspective and that design approach. What is their needs aligned to our needs, and how do you find that balancing act? And then there's the theme and assessment. Is it really strongly aligned to our mandate? Because for us to deliver on this and for our people to believe in this, it needs to be aligned to the mandate that we're delivering from our strategic point of view. And it clearly was, and we will continue that. So we've had a very successful first one, really did exceed our expectations. And now we're launching our second one, So we've gone from combating financial crime as the first theme. We're now moving into our next theme, which will be innovation and payments. And we'll start to develop those problem statements again with the ecosystem for launch. And we will be open for applications in September and October, with the program starting again in December. On top of that, we maintain the innovation hub for that early engagement, and then we keep on going with other programs, other facilities, as I mentioned earlier, as we develop them. So I'm going to stop sharing that for a second, if you don't mind. And if you bear with me, I'm just going to show you a video for 2 minutes, which I think brings to life. And you might just tell me that you can see the video on screen there.
Yep.
We are here today to showcase our first Innovation Sandbox program. But I'd certainly say it's more than a showcase. It's certainly a celebration of creativity, participation, and really deep purposeful collaboration. And really today is all about the participants.
It's been super exciting to be part of the Sandbox because we're bringing innovative technology. We're verifying children's ages, and we verify when somebody says they're the parent of the child. So we can enable, we've solved an unsolvable problem. And it was fantastic to meet with the regulators to discuss our innovation.
It's been really collaborative. And actually, one of the things that I've really seen in this is that open and engaged approach, both from the firms themselves and how they'd engage with us, but also from our own people in the central bank, the subject matter expertise, the Sandbox champions, and how they've been open and engaged with the projects that have come through the Sandbox program. What our hub tries to do is support innovators who are developing new technologies to navigate that regulatory environment. And we do this by supporting new ventures and new businesses. So it's a really exciting avenue for the central bank and a really wonderful event.
By the end of this year, financial crime will account for $10.5 trillion globally. The innovation that the crooks get up to is phenomenally good. So we need to start implementing tools that are going to start catching them.
Our experience with the Sandbox has demonstrated the benefits of innovation and looking at things from new perspectives, which will be critical in tackling financial crime in the coming years.
The financial crime is really important to our mandate. And when you think about it, the impact on consumers and the impact on financial stability as a whole, and what you've seen in this program is 7 projects who've recognized that importance, are collaborating with the central bank and others across the innovation ecosystem to solve for a really big challenge.
Brilliant. Yeah, stop sharing there. So I'll stop there and I'll have a quick look at the chat.
So before we get to the individual questions, I want to say fantastic, David. I know you, Brian, and to an extent, Alan, had an idea of what was coming up. I figured it would be focused, but that was fantastic. You've clearly done this before. You packed a lot into 20-something minutes and you kept on time. I'm so impressed. Come and join the club another day when we're less disciplined and we'll chat. Yes, please, I see some hands going up. By all means, do jot some questions down in the chat as well. And David, I can go straight to the questions, but I have a question for you, which is there something that you need to hear from Brian, or you mentioned there's somebody else who's involved in the program? Was that Dominic?
No, happy for Brian and Dominic to come in during the Q&A, just basically their experiences. I think it's always great to bring in, the participants and their view. Sometimes I can oversell it, so you get the truth and the reality from the likes of Brian and Dominic.
Well, they will be quick to fire ahead and up and loudly if they see that need. What I might do then is kind of toggle. We've got hands up, and I might start with Eric and then go to a question on chat and go back to Alan, if that's okay with you two guys. Mr. Paquin, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Owen. I must agree, it was a really good presentation. Like, there is a lot in there, and I was kind of writing down furiously, but there's something that I kept in the back of my mind as you were talking, and I suppose assumptions that regulation doesn't move or rarely moves at the pace of innovation. What do you do with the disruptors, like the one that want to introduce innovation that are maybe at the edge of regulations? Do you have kind of the power to bend those regulations, rewrite them quickly, or is like some startup that comes in maybe to replicate a model that's been successful somewhere else that's maybe less regulated, or so how do you handle that kind of gray space?
Yeah, It's a great question, Eric, because it comes to really about the approach that we've taken. So there's a number. Let me talk about the facilities as a whole. So as a sandbox, one of the things we didn't do was we didn't allow the participants to test on live customers. So in some sandboxes, what we saw was a derogation where they were allowed to test on live customers. Now, when we went out and talked to the ecosystem, one of the aspects that we found was that that was good to have, but it wasn't the most important aspect. What they actually wanted was the conversation with the regulator to understand regulation and get that advice and support. So we brought the data testing in rather than the customer testing. Do I think we'll go to customer testing in the future? It depends on the theme. I think that becomes the really important part. And it also probably comes a little bit to Jacqueline's point as well, which is there a formal structure that's used every time? And the answer is no. This is not one size fits all. This has to be engineered based on the theme, the proposed outcomes, and ultimately what you want to get from the sandbox. So that was always important from us. From a hub perspective, we see a lot of firms come into us where they'll have viewpoints and they might well be on the regulatory edge and so on. The regulations, what we want to do with the hub learnings, the sandbox learnings, and all of our engagement is, do we enable or hinder? Are we learning from this, that it informs our approach to regulation? And it does. So we take in these learnings. We produce an annual hub report yearly. One of the most important things is, and I always say this when I engage with firms, is I am not, I'm not a subject matter expert regulator. That was never my role. I'm learning some of it. I'm getting better at it with the regulator. But my job is to connect into the organization and for the organization to see the impacts of regulation, the understanding of regulation with firms, but also what firms are doing from business models, new technologies, etc. And all of that informs us massively. And I'll give you a really good example of that, Eric, how it informs us. Through the sandbox and through the hub most recently, I mentioned we've been seeing some of these use cases for AI and how AI is being used and what are those use cases. So as an organization right now, we are digesting the EU AI Act and we're working on the EU AI Act for the implementation of that. That understanding that we get through the hub and the sandbox is pivotal to that, to help us understand it. Otherwise, you'd be doing it in isolation to reality. So for us, it's that type of learning that will be strong. Does it mean that we reduce or lower our standards? I would say that as a regulator, we're quite strong in that. We don't reduce our standards. We don't lower our standards. But that being said, I think we want to learn the business models, the new technologies, so that it can inform as we develop as well.
So on the question from the chat there, David, there's a question about whether there's a structured toolkit or a standard toolkit, and I think you've answered that very well.
Slightly on. So I would flag everyone as I got into quite an argument with the IMF lead on this about what a sandbox was and what it should be. And what they said to me was, you've got to have, it has to be a digital testing ground. That's what a sandbox is. That's what you do. And my answer back was, is that what the customer wants? Is that value add to the customer? Maybe that's what it is, but who cares? Does it do anything for the ecosystem? And I had seen multiple sandboxes that were in that space that did nothing for the firms who were collaborating with it, or nothing for the central bank. So maybe it was time to blow up the sandbox model a little bit and actually bring in different aspects to it: regulatory advice and support, subject matter experts, modules and programs, collaboration by the firms. Many of the sandboxes we saw, the firms who were in it never met each other. They just came into the sandbox, did the thing and left. We were delighted by the openness and transparency that the firms did when they came in to meet each other. They had this shared learning across the ecosystem in relation to combating financial crime. So with that in mind, we said it is all about the outcome and it is designing for the audience. With that in mind, each one should be built. So I would say we have a skeleton template of what we will continue with each sandbox, but it'll never look exactly the same because we want, innovation and payments will be different to fraud. Similarly, the needs, one of the things we did at the start of every sandbox, we did it with the teams. We asked them up front, what's your needs? And we designed the program or modules around their needs.
Lovely. So I think we've done a really good job with Jacqueline's question. Until she comes back and tells us that we didn't. Thank you, David. Eric, were you asked and answered? Are you satisfied, or do you want to give David another poke?
Maybe one last poke before I leave it. more around the influence that you can have, because for a startup that wants to move quickly and get funding, waiting like in the gray area, waiting for confirmation, can they go ahead or not? Like how fast can you influence regulation? And I know it depends, but
yeah, it does. It does massively depend. Depends on where the regulations originated from, depends on which area. What I would say is the value add I think we do bring for those startups is, particularly by being able to engage through the hub on our programs, it is that learning and understanding that they get of what is regulation, authorization, and what it means to be supervised in the financial services sector. What is that? And what does that look like for you? That helps them build a roadmap. That helps them understand VC requirements. It helps them understand staffing requirements, knowledge, etc. So I think there's a real value add from that perspective. But to come back to clearly to your point, many of them will be in the edge cases, and we might not be comfortable with it, or we might be still learning of it. Do I think we move at the pace and the speed, Eric, that overnight? No, definitely not. That's not the point of regulation. There is a risk averse nature to it, but it is informing how we approach it.
Okay, Eric, whether you're answered or not now, you're answered.
Thank you.
Alan, you've been waiting extraordinarily patiently.
That's fine. I had already seen Dave's thing, and I've had 2 days to think about a question.
Ooh, big trouble coming
but no,
here,
just to soften you up, Dave, I'm going to say something first of all, right? I've worked in fintech innovation. I'm a fintech innovation nerd, particularly payments innovation. And I've worked with Sandbox. I did open banking one with the FCA, did some stuff with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And both of them you picked out as kind of best of breed. And now I know from working in the industry, there was an awful lot of grumbling over many, many years that we didn't have a proactive central bank, we didn't have a sandbox, whatever. I just want to point out that it is fantastic, the progress that you've made in such a short amount of time. And I think sometimes when you come in as a fast follower as opposed to a pioneer, you can kind of learn and synthesize a lot from what other people have done. And I think yours definitely does qualify as best in breed at the moment, and certainly suited to the needs of the Irish market, more than just kind of lifting and shifting, the FCA model, the SWIFT model, the whatever model. So I mean, I think that's been really, really interesting. I would love to know how you arrived at the financial security piece first, or the fraud piece first. I know payments is coming up. I know there's probably pieces from things like, the funds sector, funds management sector. But I mean, is this kind of almost like a consumer protection mandate or a public facing mandate, public interest mandate, that you chose the financial fraud one to lead with? Or was it just purely a kind of a landing spot to start from? I think payments is probably going to be larger in scale in terms of the numbers of incumbents and players and interested parties in the jurisdiction. But just what was the thought process behind that? Maybe would be a good one.
Yeah, great question, Alan, because there was a lot of work in that process. So what we did for the we thought about internal and external. Let me start with external first. Through our consultation process on the hub and sandbox, we actually asked, we went out to the ecosystem and said, from a topic perspective, what challenges should we be taking on? What would work from the firm's perspective and for the ecosystem and for consumers as a whole? And we got great replies to that. Now, some of it was a little bit fintech bingo, blockchain, AI, etc., words on a page, but some of it was really well detailed. And combating financial crime, fraud, the challenge of fraud jumped off the page. Similarly, what we also looked at was what was coming through our innovation hub and what had we seen coming through the ecosystem. And we saw that there were firms who were engaging on combating financial crime that wanted to engage with us and needed to go deeper and more meaningful in what it was. So from an ecosystem perspective, we had a clear message that combating financial crime was something that we could go after, as well as we would get applicants for, because there was a pipeline in play. Then from an internal perspective, we have a mandate for financial stability and consumer protection, hugely important. But that obviously, from a strategic point of view, would guide what we want to do. We engage right across the divisions. What would be important from our perspective? I will say, just slightly, maybe informally, one of the things for me was, from a passion and a vision and a purpose point of view, what could our people get behind? And I really wanted to make sure that our first Sandbox was something that people wanted to see driven out. Would it have an impact? Would it have an outcome? Would there be firms in there that you could really believe in from the perspective of what this is? And for me, combating financial crime always jumped off the page for that. The concept of engaging with and collaborating with firms who are going to get into consumers' hands to stop them from fraud, to stop them losing money, etc. To me was kind of that. There was always that underlying. There's a real vision. There's a real purpose in this, and people can get behind it and believe in what it is. But not coincidentally, but brilliantly as well. We had a demand for our own strategy on the mandate internally, and we had a demand externally as well from that perspective. Similarly, we've seen the same with payments. If you look at our innovation hub, it's flooded with payments, requests and queries. If you look at the ecosystem, it's very vibrant from a payments ecosystem. And if you look at the challenges in payments, Ireland is behind the curve. Our own governor has stated this multiple times. I think we'd recognize this, the speed of payments, maybe the data around payments, the friction in payments for small businesses, etc. How do we resolve that for them? How does that, from a really strong and thriving financial services ecosystem, what does that look like? So I think, Alan, they will always be the approach that we take to delivering that mandate. What we did say always was it's technology agnostic. The technology is just an enabler. So ultimately, it's about those problem statements and the outcomes.
If I can,
Alan, I know you might have more comment on this, Alan.
Build on that. Yeah, I did. Just want to say one thing to Dave in terms of just what you said before it goes off the boil. The payments piece, I think, and in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not going to disclose too much, but I did help somebody fill in one of your forms and try and set the agenda for one particular client firm around that. I think, there is an opportunity around payments, particularly the open banking PSR3 stuff, to potentially really raise all the boats in terms of your specific, the thing that nobody else can do except CBI, which is to inform the regulatory structure around that. I'm really excited to see what comes out of the payments piece next.
Brilliant, Alan. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, so what I'd ask David is
banking, I think, is a pivotal one in this space.
We have people who are eager to ask questions and a small number of minutes left. And one question in the chat I'd like to bring back to your attention. I think you spoke to this briefly, but in your experience, asks Catherine, were the incumbents in the Sandbox, were they there to genuinely learn, or did they slow down the innovation? Did you have both contributors and inhibitors? Were they looking to protect their moat? Did you see that dynamic?
That's a super question.
Yeah, that's Catherine. That's what Catherine does.
So, Catherine, where we started from, and so all cards on the table, all honesty, where we started from, I absolutely expected that. We felt that IP wouldn't be shared. We felt, and even not even to the level of IP, that maybe even the conversations wouldn't happen, and that they would protect their moats. There would be a little bit of, the sparring in the ring, observing each other, not really sharing anything, not really collaborating. We were very worried how those modules would work. That slide that I showed you of the 4 principles was kind of our guiding position of, can we bring the firms on this journey with us? I would get that the firms might come into it with a sense of conservativeness and maybe not mistrust, but just, where's this going? It's the regulator. And they had to learn that we were trying to be a new approach of open and engaged in the Sandbox, but also with themselves. And genuinely from day one, and Brian, Dominic, you can evidence this yourselves, but from day one, we went into those modules and the discussion didn't stop. There was shared learnings, there was conversations and challenges all the time around particular aspects of conversation that were needed, sharing of what each product was doing and how they were trying to think about it and what they were taking on. And that was a huge delight to us. I want to try and maintain that through all of our Sandboxes. I don't know if we can, but it's a piece of work that I think for any innovation, it's important for that collaboration. Dominic, Brian, I don't know about yourselves, if you'd agree.
I was going to add to that. So, and this obviously gives me a chance to get in with my question before John as well. So perfect.
Right.
I'm going to take it.
Well, I'll let the two of you fight that out.
No, that's tongue in cheek. Like, I actually, when I saw the question, it was like, oh, where's this coming from? Because like I hadn't even thought. It was like, okay, wow. I think when we joined, when I can speak for ourselves, when we joined the Sandbox, I think we were unsure as to how is this going to work, what was the value in it for us, But as anyone who has listened to me, it definitely exceeded our expectations. Like I can remember the first workshop where there was a set agenda, and we'd sort of done the first time we were meeting people face to face, and kind of the discussion was that kind of good. In the morning session, we kind of agreed to change the agenda of the afternoon session, that sort of way. So there was that level of collaboration and openness from the very start that people probably could see, well, we're in this, there's value in this. Let's make something happen. I think that was probably one of the things I wanted to mention as well. How the Sandbox helped from a product development perspective was similar to what you said there, Dave, in your example around that sort of allowed us to focus, on regulation and build that into our culture. That example you gave, I think it allowed us to kind of focus, product development life cycles are long. I'm in the middle of something to start in a hackathon idea 4 years ago. You know what I mean? So now I've got 6-month window, I can actually get something done. I can learn something, get validation of my thoughts, everything like that. And actually, uncover opportunities. Again, I've talked to 2 of the participants around co-innovation and got to a stage of signed NDAs, so those sort of conversations were an outcome of, I'm going to say, probably 2 factors, both obviously with the central bank, I think, and the opportunity to facilitate and allow that to happen, but also the participants as well. So I think there's obviously, it's a both sides. But going into it, it really did exceed my expectations. The amount of open sharing, IP, project roadmaps, so there was a lot. So it definitely wasn't protect the moat. It was nearly, this is what I'm doing. Are you having the same challenges? Or this is what's going on, that sort of way. It was the therapy element rather than, any other element.
Now, speaking of therapy, if we don't let John ask this question, he's going to explode in about 2 minutes. Mr. Murphy.
Actually, I have a simple one for you, David. I'm very curious to understand, what does success look like for the central bank leadership team, the SLT? What does that, and how do you measure it? And is there such a thing as KPIs that you can share?
KPIs, my favorite topic on Sandboxes. So what does success look like? We set this up on a couple of metrics. We're working with the steering group and the senior management team on this. What is it that we want to deliver? So at a macro level, we set down, we wanted fundamental outcomes from the Sandbox. If the Sandbox was theory and theory alone, it's not what we want. So our job and our mandate on financial system and consumer protection only works if these great projects get into the hands of consumers, businesses, and into the system. So that was a fundamental outcome for us. Second element for us was, how does it inform and educate our own people by engaging in this? So the Champion Network and the SME, we surveyed afterwards to talk about what they learned and how they took traction out of this, and to inform their areas of expertise, which again has been strong from that perspective. So there's the learning aspect from that. There are unqualified wins that we don't measure, such as Ireland Inc., from the perspective of having a sandbox and being strong from an innovative perspective on fintech and the thing. That's not our agenda. I know this has a fundamental impact on it, and I think it's great to have it, but ultimately it's not ours. So we have those 2 sides for us, which is the firm and the outcomes on the problem statements, followed by the knowledge and the learning insight. We are right now, but we're getting a survey to the participants as well to be able to NPS the program. So we brought an NPS measurement to the program for success with them and what that looks like. So that's the level that we put on it. From a very senior level, as we talked about, like, it's fundamentally around that, informing regulation, developing the skills and capability of our staff, and then the outcomes into the financial system. That's it.
That's great, David. Time for one more question, and Mr. Kennedy, you're it.
Yeah. So I suppose, obviously, having participated in, in the inaugural program, I think there probably is a successful product there, if we want to label like that. If you take a step back from an innovation perspective, I'm sort of saying, okay, you've done your first sandbox, you've the proof of concept, this works, there's enough value in it. I'm sort of thinking, similar to the challenges you have when you're in real innovation, have you got any thoughts on, or even has this come into the central bank's thinking around how might you scale it? Given some of the challenges, do you sort of say, well, actually, we're going to keep one sandbox going, combating financial fraud? It's not necessarily 6 months. It's something that keeps going indefinitely for a certain amount of time again, and participants can come in and out or whatever. I just mean, is there any thoughts on now that, what's been successful?
Yeah, Brian, you're absolutely right. So the question now is how to do this for more. So one of the things I didn't touch on, by the way, was we only worked with 7 projects. Now we are producing an insights and outcome paper for the whole ecosystem in Q4 of what we learned in the Combating Financial Crime Sandbox. Similarly, UL is producing a independent third-party report on the sandbox to say what worked, what didn't work, what are the learnings to inform future sandboxes. So that'll give us great insights to share across the ecosystem, and we will do that for every single sandbox. In relation to Brian's point, I think the question for us is the sandbox works absolutely because of the duration, the value add and so on that's needed in it. But there's more agile ways to do some of this work. There are faster ways to do some of this work. So what we'd like to do in tandem with the sandbox is to do quicker, faster sprints, where it might be a week or 2 week focused with 3 or 4 firms on a particular topic, where we're choosing key aspects of financial services innovation, learning from that, helping inform, to Eric's point, helping inform how we engage with early stage startups who might be on the periphery or might be challenging regulation in different ways. How do we learn that faster and quicker? Sandboxes are long and they're heavy resource. Some of this work can be done quicker to get nuggets of information to inform in what we do. I see us doing more of that, Brian, whether that's hacks, whether that's sprints, whether that's labs. They'll be the elements that we bring to this. They all have different terms. The way I like to think of them is outcomes and duration.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Brian. I think
if it's helpful, just to say to Paul on his question in relation to data. So the data sets that we used have been tested across multiple sandboxes, both FCA sandboxes and others. So as a first cut of data to use them, they were tested and used quite successfully in other sandboxes. I'm not aware there was any bias from that. We know, from the perspective of what we had bought and brought in from the NIA 1 expertise, not something that I was aware was in it, but it was synthetic data that had been tested and used for other combating financial crime sprints, hacks, and labs.
Okay, useful, Paul?
Yes, very, thank you.
Okay, so what I'd like to say now is we've got a couple of minutes left. I don't think we've got time for another question and answer because there's a couple of little pieces we need to say. But the first thing to say is, David, thank you so much for saying yes. And then for bringing yourself to this and opening up and being very honest. And it is amazing how someone, the central bank, can do this to that scale with that freedom, bring that mood, that culture to bear, and be that focused on real impact. Because it's too easy for someone who has the role of administrator, regulator, to just step back and say, that's not our job. We'll sit back and let people come to us. And you didn't do it. So that's really impressive. Good luck with the rest of that program. Round 2, we'd love to do this again, and we'd love to see you again on a Friday. And I bet you there might be the odd pop, prod, or a poke if you are brave enough to show up again on a Friday. That's typically what happens anyway. So Brian, well done to you as well. And Dominic, I believe you're involved in this program, so it's great to see you here on the day as well. A couple of points for today. Catherine, I don't know if you're able to speak. I know you're driving, but what we typically do...
I'm in the car, but actually, David, thank you for that. I'm in the car. I apologize for my lack of vision, literally and figuratively. But actually, you're not on my innovation ecosystem map, but in about 20 minutes, you will be. So, yes, new addition.
Thank you, Catherine. David, if you didn't know, Innovate Island, which means Catherine, by the way, created an island-wide innovation ecosystem map, which has been hugely powerful for us and has been really useful to Enterprise Ireland IDA. And in fact, Catherine's talking about it at the IDA next week. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Okay, so last minute notes from Innovate Island is simply, again, thanks for the day. Thanks for everybody for the contributions. I've seen some applauses and some heads nodding and some impressed looking faces. Well done. And I just highlight that we do typically take a break from doing Friday sessions for July and August, but we'll be back in September. We've got a lot lined up for September. I won't dive into it now, but we are doing a final coffee stop next week, which is sort of like an end of term session where we'll look at some of the things and some of the people we spoke to in Q2 in particular, and dive into some of the lessons from that. An insights and lessons learned session is probably what it'll look like, David, based on today. And I'd like to highlight one other event to everybody's here that we are taking part, and probably you can say we are leading the line on the day at an Innovation Management Summit on the 11th of September in TUD Grange Gorman East Quad, and that's going to be sponsored by the IDA. And if we're talking about innovation management, then Jacqueline, yes, we will be rolling out the 56,000 family standards and how they're not scary, really. But then I would say that, wouldn't I? A bit like David and the central bank. Trust us, he says. Trust us. Yeah. So that's me done. Catherine, I don't know if you had a final word, or Alan, if you wanted to pipe in, but I think we've had a great hour. Yeah. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks. Bye-bye.